Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Pastor Sean coming to you live from Death Search Radio Podcast, and also the Sean C. Stookie Show on Facebook. And what we're going to be doing today is doing a 3 to 4 part video where I'm going to be going over the book by Patrick J. Buchanan, The Death of the West. I've heard a lot of things about this book in different podcasts that I've listened to. I believe one of them being brought up on the Joe Rogan podcast at some point, and so I wanted to check it out. So what we're going to do is just go ahead and treat this as if it's a podcast instead of watching a video. I'm going to play it on this website called Internet Archives. It's 319 pages. So it's probably going to take, this video series probably going to take 3 to 4 weeks to get through the whole book. So let's go ahead and get started. It is by the best-selling author of Right from the Beginning, Patrick J. Buchanan, The Death of the West, How Dying Populations and Immigrant Invasions Imperil Our Country and Civilization.
New warts and all histories that play up our crimes and sins, revealing what we have loved to be loathsome and those we have revered to be disreputable, even
Okay, it's starting to screw up here.
Many of the institutions that now of America's past operate on the principles of Big Brother's Ministry of Truth. Drop down the memory hole, the patriotic stories of America's great.
What's going on?
Dishonor or disgrace a nation.
Okay, just a second. The page for some reason isn't loading. Just a second. Okay, there it goes. Okay, so I was at way too far ahead. So we're going to start from the beginning here.
Also by Patrick J. Buchanan, the new majority
Page
conservative
3.
votes, liberal victories right from the beginning.
So I actually haven't done this. I just wanted to throw this out there. I haven't done a video like this in about a year or so. So when it comes to this kind of format, being that I'm using a new computer now, is that I'm going to be having a robot voice talk to you guys, and then I'm going to be commenting on things that I hear or things that I hear and read on here. So let's go ahead and get started. It's an exploration, so I'm going to be stopping this randomly to give my critiques on what we're listening to.
The Great Betrayal, a republic, not an empire. The Death of the West, How Dying Populations and Immigrant Invasions Imperil Our Country and Civilization. Thomas Dunn Books, St. Martin's Press in New York.
Okay,
Contents intro. 8 Christian. This is the way the TS. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but a whimper. T.S. Eliot, The Hollow Men. Some withered nerve in her brain twitched slightly. She softened, smiled, and told him a story about her grandfather who had been a page at Queen Victoria's coronation. That was another world, he said. Another civilization, she corrected him. The one I was born into. It has died. I say, died, not vanished, because it was a living organism. A civilization based on the family. What has taken its place is not alive. An atomized society, without security, without warmth, a chaos of fragmented mechanical relationships. Oh, I know as well as you do, that in my world all was not well, there was ignorance and poverty. But the right way was not to tear that world down and replace it by anarchy. The family base should have been extended, cherished, encouraged. Storm Jameson, 1966, The Early Life of Stephen Hind. Pat, we're losing the country we grew up in. Again and again in the endless campaign of 2000, I heard that lament from men and women across America. But what did they mean by it? Why should sadness or melancholy, as though one's father were dying and there were nothing to be done, have crept into the hearts of Americans on the cusp of the second American century? Were these not, as Mr. Clinton constantly reminded us, the best of times in America, with the lowest unemployment and inflation in 30 years, crime rates falling, and incomes soaring? Are we not, as Madeleine Albright never ceased to boast, the indispensable nation? Was this not, as Mr. Bush trumpeted, our time of unrivaled military power, economic promise, and cultural influence? We had won the Cold War. Our ideas were winning all over the world. What were they talking about? What was their problem? It is this. America has undergone a cultural and social revolution. We are not the same country that we were in 1970 or even 1980. We are not the same people. After the 2000,
I apologize.
What were they talking about? We are not.
The internet on here is screwing up again. I'm not sure why this is happening right now. I apologize. Let's just go ahead and continue.
The same people. After the 2000 election, pollster William McIntosh told the Washington Post, "We have two massive colliding forces. One is rural, Christian, religiously conservative. The other is socially tolerant, pro-choice, secular, living in New England and the Pacific Coast." Disraeli said Victorian England was two nation. Rich and poor.
I apologize. I don't know why the internet is not working.
Say than people in South Carolina.
There it goes.
Even the great wave of immigration from 1890 to 1920 was nothing like this. America is God's crucible, the great melting pot where all the races of Europe are melting and reforming, wrote Israel Zangwill, the Russian Jewish playwright, in his famous 1908 play, The Melting Pot. 7. But the immigration tsunami rolling over America is not coming from all the races of Europe. The largest population transfer in history is coming from all the races of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and they are not melting and reforming. In 1960, only 16 million Americans did not
melding to. Okay. But the immigration tsunami rolling over America is not coming from all the races of Europe, quote unquote. The large population transfer in history is coming from all the races of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and they are not melting and reforming. What exactly does he mean by that? In 1960, only 16 million Americans did not trace their ancestors
to Europe. Today, the number is 80 million. No nation has ever undergone so rapid and radical a transformation. At Portland State in 1998, Mr. Clinton rhapsodized to a cheering student audience about a day when Americans of European descent will be a minority. Today, largely because of immigration, there is no majority race in Hawaii or Houston or New York City. Within 5 years, there will be no majority race in our largest state, California. In a little more than 50 years, there will be no majority race in the United States. No other nation in history has gone through demographic change of this magnitude in so short a time. 8. Correction. No nation in history has gone through a demographic change of this magnitude in so short a time, and remained the same nation. Mr. Clinton assured us that it will be a better America when we are all minorities and realize true diversity. Well, those students are going to find out, for they will spend their golden years in a third world America. Uncontrolled immigration threatens to deconstruct the nation we grew up in and convert America into a conglomeration of peoples with almost nothing in common. Not history, heroes, language, culture, faith, or ancestors. Balkanization beckons. The strongest tendency
is the point that for us to have a national identity as Europeans or Anglo-Saxons, I'm assuming, like as the general basis of every state, where the whites essentially are the ones that should have the most population and have their own traditionalism, and I'm assuming it means Judeo-Christian values also. Okay, let's continue playing. I'm just a little confused here.
In the late 20th century, writes Jacques Barzun in his History of the West, from dawn to decadence, was separatism. It affected all forms of unity. The ideal of pluralism had disintegrated and separatism took its place. As one partisan of the new goal put it, salad bowl is better than melting pot. 9. The great nations of Europe have begun to break apart, writes Barzun. If one surveyed the Occident, one could see that the greatest political creation of the West, the nation-state, was stricken. In Great Britain, the former kingdoms of Scotland and Wales won autonomous parliaments. In France, the Bretons, Basques, and Alsatians cried out for regional power. Corsica wanted independence and a language of its own. Italy harbored a league that would cut off the north from the south, and Venice produced a small party wanting their city a separate state. 10. As people return their allegiance to the lands whence they came, transnational elites pull us in the opposite direction. The final surrender of national sovereignty to world government is now openly advocated. From Walter Cronkite to Stroll Talbot, From the World Federalist Association to the UN Millennium Summit, the chorus swells. At Maastricht in 1991, 15 European nations, including France, Italy, Germany, and Great Britain, decided to begin converting their free trade zone into a political union and transferring their sovereign powers to a socialist superstate. In 2000, the president-elect of Mexico came here to propose a North American Union of Canada, Mexico, and the United States. Though the erasure of our borders would mean the end of our nation, Vicente Fox was hailed in the U.S. media as a visionary, and President Clinton expressed his regret that he might not be around to see it happen. I think over the long run, our countries will become more interdependent. It will be the way of the world. I regret that I won't be around for a lot of it, but I think it's a good thing. 11. Nor is America immune to the forces of separatism, a sense that America, too, is pulling apart along.
Okay, so you can, from what he's, I believe Pat Buchanan was working under Clinton. Is that what this is? If this is what this is implying, but just because of all the weird, disgusting things of all these different supposed actions, this is, supposed things that have to do with Bill Clinton and the things that he's a part of, and also now this is connecting to a socialist state, like this type of mindset that he was going towards at the time back in the 90s. And I'm assuming Obama, obviously, too, but it's just, I mean, we're still, this is only page 4 in the introduction. And so to connect as a super state or a super socialist super state in a way. So, okay, let's go and continue. I'll just form my thoughts after the introduction.
Ethnicity and race is spreading. Moreover, America has just undergone a cultural revolution, with a new elite now occupying the commanding heights through its capture of the institutions that shape and transmit ideas, opinions, beliefs, and values, TV, the arts, entertainment, education. This elite is creating a new people, not only ethnically and racially, but culturally and morally. We are no longer one people or one nation under God. Millions have begun to feel like strangers in their own land. They recoil from a popular culture that is saturated with raw sex and trumpet hedonistic values. They see old holidays disappear and old heroes degraded. They see the art and artifacts of a glorious past removed from their museums and replaced by the depressing, the ugly, the abstract, the anti-American. They watch as books they cherished disappear from the schools they attended, to be replaced by authors and titles they never heard of. The moral code that they were raised to live by has been overthrown. The culture they grew up with is dying inside the country they grew up in. In half a lifetime, many Americans have seen their God dethroned, their heroes defiled, their culture polluted, their values assaulted, their country invaded, and themselves demonized as extremists and bigots for holding on to beliefs Americans have held for generations. To make us love our country ought to be lovely, said Burke. 12. In too many ways America is no longer lovely. Though she remains a great country, many wonder if she is still a good country. Some feel that she is no longer their country. We did not leave America, they say, she left us. As Euripides wrote, there is no greater sorrow on earth than the loss of one's native land. 13. When Cornwallis's army marched out of Yorktown, the fife and drums played, the world turned upside down. Now our world has been turned upside down. What was right and true yesterday is wrong and false today. What was immoral and shameful, promiscuity, abortion, euthanasia, suicide, has become progressive and praiseworthy. Nietzsche called it the transvaluation of all values. The old virtues become sins, and the old sins become virtues. Every few years, a storm erupts when some public figure blurts out, America is a Christian nation. She was once, and a majority yet call themselves Christians, but our dominant culture should more accurately be called post-Christian, or anti-Christian, for the values it celebrates are the antithesis of what it used to mean be a Christian. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not have strange gods before me was the first commandment Moses brought down from Mount Sinai, but the new culture rejects the God of the Old Testament and burns its incense at the altars of the global economy. Kipling's gods of the marketplace have shouldered aside the God of the Gospels. Sex, fame, money, power, those are what our new America is all about. We are two countries, two peoples. An older America is passing away, and a new America is coming into its own. The new Americans who grew up in the 1960s and the years since did not like the old America. They thought it a bigoted, reactionary, repressive, stodgy country, so they kicked the dust from their heels and set out to build a new America, and they have succeeded. To its acolytes, the Cultural Revolution has been a glorious revolution, but to millions, they have replaced the good country we grew up in with a cultural wasteland and a moral sewer that are not worth living in and not worth fighting for. Their country, not ours.
Okay, I do agree with partially of that, of the God of the Old Testament, who is still the same God of the New Testament, is not culturally significant, so to say, anymore in like Hollywood and all that. I mean, it sort of never was exactly. I mean, no, it was for like a time period, but I mean, I do agree with that it's more of like a globalist agenda now, and basically things that are of the wiles of the devil, where these billionaires and these people are connecting to this form of like these new things of like debauchery and whatnot, what was just in the closet kind of thing, like 100 so years ago, basically before, I guess during, let's say like right after World War II, and then the 60s, everything just kind of changed. So I do agree with that, where instead of it being more focused on the God of the Old Testament, the Father, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, where it's more of like it morphed into something else, which is not necessarily of God. It's like the lovey-dovey version, the teddy bear version, as opposed to who God really is. So I do agree with that paragraph there. I like that. So
in the election of 2000, the political differences between the Beltway parties were inconsequential. Mr. Bush wanted a larger tax cut than Mr. Gore, who wanted to spend more for prescription drugs. Why then the violentness of the Florida recount? Writes Terry Teachout in his post-election assessment of a polarized America, the rancorous intensity with which the Bush and Gore camps disputed the outcome of the 2000 election all too clearly reflected the magnitude of their culture differences, and it may be that the tone of that dispute will characterize American politics for the foreseeable future. 14 exactly. The savagery of our politics reflects the depth of the moral divide that separates us as Americans. 100 times in the campaign of 2000, a voter would come up and say that he or she believed in me and agreed with me, but could not vote for me. These people had to vote for Bush, because only Bush could keep Gore out of the White House, and we must stop Gore. It was not that they agreed with Clinton and Gore. They detested them. The Cultural Revolution has poisoned American politics, and we have not begun to see the worst of it. In the hours after that awful morning of September 1st, Americans did come together again, in grief and sorrow over our terrible losses, in admiration and awe of the heroic firemen who ran into the World Trade Center as others ran out to safety, in our rage and resolution to do justice to those who did this to our countrymen. But by October, that unity had begun to fade. It will not long survive our first victories in the war on terror, any more than the first President Bush's 90% support survived his victory in Desert Storm. For our divisions are rooted in our deepest beliefs, and upon those beliefs Americans are almost as divided as we were when General Beauregard gave the order to fire on Fort Sumter. Once again, we are seceding from one another, only this time, it is a secession of the heart. In one of the more controversial addresses of the 20th century, I told the 1992 Republican National Convention at Houston, "My friends, this election is about more than who gets what, it is about who we are. It is about what we believe, it is about what we stand for as Americans. There is a religious war going on in our country for the soul of America. It is a cultural war, as critical to the kind of nation we shall one day be as was the Cold War itself. And in that struggle for the soul of America, Clinton and Clinton are on the other side, and George Bush is on our side. And so, we have to come home and stand beside him." 15 The words ignited a firestorm that blazed on through 1992 and has not yet burned itself out. My words were called divisive and hateful. They were not. They were divisive and truthful. Let others judge, after 8 years, whether I spoke the truth about Bill and Hillary Clinton. But Mr. Clinton was rescued from certain impeachment because he personified the other side of that culture war, and his removal would have imperiled the gains of a decade. That not a single Democrat voted to convict Mr. Clinton testifies to the success of the revolution in overthrowing the old moral order and its objective standards of truth, morality, and justice. To the new elite, what advances the revolution is moral, and what threatens it is immoral. Between Senate Democrats and the OJ jury, there is a moral equivalence. Truth, justice, and morality triumphed in both cases, because our side won and our man got off. The Bolshevik Revolution that began with the
I don't know if that was a form of a joke. I mean, obviously, like well, not obviously, but the things that you have read about and seen, even with Jeffrey Epstein and like the Clintons and whatnot, it's like obviously this person, like the Clintons are more like those people are morally corrupt. Like I mean, just from the amount of evidence of me studying and whatnot, different news sources and whatnot, that's pretty much what you can come to. But also with the OJ Simpson case, I don't know if he wrote it as a joke or he's being serious. I don't know who this I don't know who this person is. But next part, I don't know if this is still in the introduction. It is page 8 for her. Let's see here. Okay, it is the introduction. So we're going to talk about, or he wrote about the Bolshevik Revolution. So let's go back
to the new elite. The Bolshevik Revolution that began with the storming of the Winter Palace in 1917 died with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. The dream of its true believers was to create a new socialist man, but police terror, the camps of the Gulag, and 70 years of indoctrinating children in hatred of the West and the moral superiority of Marx and Lenin did not work. Communism was the god that failed. When the mighty structure built on a foundation of lies came crashing down, the peoples of Eastern Europe and Russia threw the statues of Stalin and Lenin and the books of Marx and Engels onto the landfill of history without looking back. But where Lenin's revolution failed, the one that erupted on the campuses in the 60s succeeded. It put down roots in society, and it created a new America. By 2000, the adversary culture of the 60s had become our dominant culture. Its victory conceded when the political base camp of traditionalism raised a white flag in Philadelphia. On the moral and social issues, the fight for the sanctity of human life and the return of God to the public square of this land we used to call God's country, the Republican Party raised its gloves and pleaded, "No mas." In The Death of the West, I hope to describe this revolution, what it stands for, where it came from, how it went about dethroning our God, vandalizing our temples, altering our beliefs, and capturing the young, and what its triumph portends. For this revolution is not unique to us. It has captured all the nations of the West. A civilization, a culture, a faith, and a moral order rooted in that faith are passing away and are being replaced by a new civilization, culture, faith, and moral order. But the title of this book is The Death of the West, and the our culture war has divided us, and mass immigration risks the balkanization of America. A graver, more immediate crisis is at hand. The West is dying. Its nations have ceased to reproduce, and their populations have stopped growing and begun to shrink. Not since the Black Death carried off a third of Europe in the 14th century has there been a graver threat to the survival of Western civilization. Today, in 17 European countries, there are more burials than births, more coffins than cradles. The countries are Belgium, Bulgaria, Croatia, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, Germany, Hungary, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, and Russia. 16 Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, all the Christian faiths are represented in the Great Death March of the West. The new hedonism seems unable to give people a reason to go on living. Its earliest fruits appear to be poisonous. Will this new, liberating culture that our young have so enthusiastically embraced prove the deadliest carcinogen of them all? And if the West is in the grip of a culture of death, as the Pope contends and the statistics seem to show, is Western civilization about to follow Lenin's empire to the same inglorious end? A century ago, Gustav Le Bon wrote in his classic The Crowd, the real cause of the great upheavals which precede changes of civilizations, such as the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of the Arabian Empire, is a profound modification in the ideas of the peoples. The memorable events of history are the visible effects of the invisible changes of human thought. The present epoch is one of these critical moments in which the thought of mankind is undergoing.
Okay, it's not reading some of these words correctly. The memorial events of history are the visible effects of the invisible changes of human thought. The present epoch is one of these critical moments in which the thought of mankind is undergoing a process of transformation. Okay, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's like wicked or evil. It's just evolving. It's just changing. Um, what I'm what I'm so far understanding from the introduction is that he's talking specifically about um, like the change of generation since World War II of us, the changing of more becoming leftist and communist and Marxist, as opposed to just staying with the morals and the things that we've had before, or during, or even after World War II. But then when the '60s came in with that music and the culture and the clothing and the drug effects and use of psychedelics and whatnot, like to change around everything. And then we've been in an influx ever since. I believe this is what this guy is saying, is that those things were all bad and it's like a form of social decay, I think.
Process of transformation. 17. Laban was speaking of his own time, the end of the 19th century, but what he wrote is truer of ours. For it is this cultural revolution that has led to just such a profound modification in the ideas of peoples, and those ideas have made Western elites apparently indifferent to the death of their civilization. They do not seem to care if the end of the West comes by depopulation, by a surrender of nationhood, or by drowning in waves of third world immigration. Now that all the Western empires are gone, Western man, relieved of his duty to civilize and Christianize mankind, reveling in luxury in our age of self-indulgence, seems to have lost his will to live and reconciled himself to his impending death. Are we in the twilight of the West? Is the death of the West irreversible? Let us review the pathologist's report. 1. Endangered species. Europeans are a vanishing species. 1. London Times. The most important single new certainty, if only because there is no precedent for it in all of history, is the collapsing birth rate in the developed world. 2. A growing population has long been a mark of healthy nations and rising civilizations. Falling populations have been a sign of nations and civilizations in decline. If that holds true, Western civilization, power and wealth aside, is in critical condition. 4. Like the Cheshire Cat, the people of the West have begun to fade away. As late as 1960, European people, including Americans, Australians, and Canadians, numbered 750 million, one-fourth of the 3 billion people alive. Western nations were in the baby boom of the century. Shorn of their empires, the wounds of war healed, they seemed alive with vitality.
Okay, so depopulation of Europeans, Anglo-Saxons. That is just, I mean, it is a part of the culture. I'm a millennial. I've been affected because of that culture where it is not natural for me to want kids. I don't, it's more of a growing of life experience as and growing older without having the responsibilities of raising little kids. Because I just personally find kids like really annoying. I don't like kids. Not to say that there's anything against what Jesus talked about with children, that you're supposed to have kids. Like it's also talking about the book of Genesis to populate the earth, but most of the population of earth where, people are having still a lot of kids are Africans, Asians, and Indians from India. So they are still in the culture where they want to have big families, even if one or a couple of the kids die so at early ages. So I mean, maybe he's going to explain this.
Indeed, neo-Malthusians were bewailing the population explosion, warning darkly that the Earth's resources and land were running out. They were laughed at. By 2000, however, no one was laughing. While world population had doubled to 6 billion in 40 years, the European peoples had stopped reproducing.
Yeah, I did look at the population index last week. We are almost at, I believe, 8 billion now in 2020. So, even though the United States is the third largest place with the most amount of people on the planet. So,
reproducing, their populations had begun to stagnate and, in many countries, had already begun to Peter F. Drucker. Fall. Of Europe's 47 nations, only one, Muslim Albania, was, by 2000, maintaining a birth rate sufficient to keep it alive indefinitely. Europe had begun to die. The prognosis is grim. Between 2000 and 2050, world population will grow by more than 3 billion to over 9 billion people, but this 50% increase in global population will come entirely in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, as 100 million people of European stock vanish from the earth. In 1960, people of European ancestry were 1/4 of the world's population. In 2000, they were 1/6. In 2050, they will be 1/10. These are the statistics of a vanishing race. A growing awareness of what they portend has induced a sense of foreboding, even panic, in Europe. Europe in 2000, the total population of Europe, from Iceland to Russia, was 728 million. At present birth rates, however, without new immigration, her population will crash to 600 million by 2050. That is the projection of world population prospects. The 2000 revision highlights released by the authoritative UN Population Division on February 28, 2001. Another study has Europe's population plummeting to 556 million by mid-century. The last time Europe's population showed a drop of this magnitude was during the Black Plague of 1347-52. Economics professor Jacqueline Casson of Humboldt State University in California.
It's the year 1347 to 1352. Just throw it in there.
California, author of War Against Population, considers today's Earth an even graver crisis. With a plague like the 14th century Black Death, maybe 1/3 of Europe died, but it took the elderly as well as the young. But this plunging fertility takes only the young. A couple still has parents and grandparents to support, directly or through their taxes. Since they've got fewer or no siblings to share that burden, having children seems even more unaffordable. So how do you dig your way out of a hole like a shrinking population? Excellent question, and if Europe does not find the answer soon, Europe dies. How bleak is the situation? Of the 20 nations with the lowest birth rates in the world, 18 are in Europe. The average fertility rate of a European woman has fallen to 1.4 children, with 2.1 needed just to replace the existing population, says columnist Ben Wattenberg. This does not mean ZPG, zero population growth. This means ZP, zero population. 5 Americans in NATO will soon be defending.
I'll tell you what, if you say to just white people and European people that the government says that you're going to get a check no matter what, if you have a kid, and the more kids you have, the bigger the government check you're going to get, basically to just raise kids, that's going to rise up by a lot if, President Trump ever tries to put something like that in Congress or whatever part of, or just all of Europe.
A vast leisure.
I mean, that's not going to happen, but I'm just saying.
World. If the present fertility rates hold, Europe's population will decline to 207 million by the end of the 21st century. Less than 30% of today's, the cradle of Western civilization, will have become its grave. Why is this happening? Socialism, the beatific vision of European intellectuals for generations, is one reason. If everyone has the promise of a state pension, children are no longer a vital insurance policy against want and old age, argues Dr. John Wallace of Bologna's Johns Hopkins University. If women can earn more than enough to be financially independent, a husband is no longer essential. And if you can also have sex and not babies, and this seems to be true now of Catholic Italy as it is of secular Britain, why marry? 6. By freeing husbands, wives, and children of family responsibilities, European socialists have eliminated the need for families. Consequently, families have begun to disappear. When they are gone, Europe goes with them. But as Europe is dying, the Third World adds 100 million people, one New Mexico, every 15 months. 40 New Mexicos in the Third World by 2050, while Europe will have lost the equivalent of the entire population of Belgium, Holland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, and Germany. Absent divine intervention, or a sudden desire on the part of Western women to begin having the same size families as their grandmothers, the future belongs to the Third World. As T.S. Eliot wrote in The Hollow Men, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. 7 C. Eliot.
Yeah, T.S. Eliot, that's The Wasteland. It's a really good poem. So, yeah, that's Clemenceau's Revenge. So, yeah, I mean, it could be it could be a thing with faith. It could be a thing of, because there are, people out there, especially even with illegal immigrants, where if you have a child here, they're called dreamers or anchor babies, that the government actually pays, that you can get tax breaks on basically having kids. But I'm like specifically speaking about like for monthly payments, as if you're basically getting, it's like the equivalent of a minimum wage job. So let's just say if Trump comes out, or whoever's running, Europe right now, I'm not sure who it is, but uh, it's going to sound bad. That if there are, to get the birth rates up, you're basically being told that, hey, we're going to pay you like $3,000 to $5,000. We're going to pay you $3,000 a month for every white Anglo-Saxon kid that you have. So two white people come together to have kids, and we're going to pay you exponentially for how many kids you choose to raise. But then that could just play into a different problem, because it's not necessarily like the problem of, because faith plays a great role into that, because you don't know if that those people are going to be saved or whatnot. Like, when growing up, or if it's just going to cause more crime or whatnot. Let's continue.
NCEAU's Revenge. There are 20 million Germans too many.
Clemenceau's Revenge.
Muttered Georges Clemenceau, the Tiger of France and the statesman most responsible for the Versailles Treaty, which stripped Germany of her colonies, a tenth of her land, and an eighth of her people. 8. Clemenceau's hatred is understandable. As Alistair Home writes in his History of the Fall of the Third Republic, Clemenceau had been one of the deputies to protest against the surrender of Alsace-Lorraine in 1871, and had narrowly escaped being lynched in the Civil War that followed with the Commune. 9. He had witnessed the dethronement of his emperor and seen a German Kaiser crowned at Versailles. In the Great War, he had seen his beloved France ravaged by the armies of Hindenburg and Ludendorff, which had left behind the bodies of 1.5 million Frenchmen when they marched home to the Reich. In 50 years, the Tiger will have his revenge, for German women are refusing to have children. For 10 years, Germany's birth rate has stood at 1.3 children per woman, far below the 2.1 needed to replace the present population. Here is the future that is now hard upon the German nation. By 2050, 23 million Germans will have disappeared. Germany's 82 million people will have fallen to 59 million. The number of German children under 15 will have dropped to 7.3 million. A third of Germany's population will be over 65. These seniors will outnumber German children more than 2 to 1. Germany's total population will be 2/3 of 1% of the world's population, and only 1 of every 150 people on Earth will be a German, and Germans will be among the oldest people on Earth. At the request of the author, Joseph Kame, director of the UN's Population Division, projected the population of several European nations out to 2100. If the present German birth rate is sustained and immigration is zero, Germany's population will fall from 82 million to 38.5 million by century's end, a drop of 53%. 10. The Bavarian conservative and potential Chancellor Edmund Stoiber considers Germany's birth rate a ticking time bomb. 11. He urges a tripling of the child allowance for the first 3 years of life. Today, Germany pays monthly subsidies of $140 a child for the first 2, more for a third. Stoiber's idea is called radical today. It will not be tomorrow. My reason for not having kids is that I like to sleep. I read a lot, and I can sleep throughout the night, says Gabrielle Benheiser, 34, a banker in Berlin vacationing in Rome with her live-in boyfriend. 12. We are dinks, confirmed Andreas Gurman, 37, using the acronym popular even in Germany for double income, no kids couples. 13. In the long run, the self-indulgence of dinks like Gurman and Benheiser may prove more faithful for the German people than the Third Reich. With the fall of the Berlin Wall, West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl sought to reunify his country after 45 years of Cold War division. In Britain, Russia, France, even in the United States, were heard anguished cries that the world could not trust a united Germany. Twice, Germany had tried to conquer Europe, It was protested. What guarantee have we that a united Germany will not march again on Europe? This is one worry the West can lay to rest. With the German people aging and dying, with 5 million fewer German children expected in 2050 than are alive in 2000, Germany, like the old soldier of General MacArthur's ballad, is about to just slowly fade away. Italy, a theme park prospects for the Italian race.
Okay, yeah. I mean, obviously, people who are history buffs know that Germany waged war with the world twice and oddly almost won. So, yeah, but I just, I mean, I can understand like it's kind of like a tragedy, really, with any type of population of any specific kind of people. It's just for specifically Germans and Europeans. I don't know. I don't understand what the urgency is exactly. It's just in a form of morph and in a form of like it's just in a form of like evolution, I guess. I mean, yes, technically it is a mindset because God told people to multiply the earth in Genesis, and God uh, has created the all the different races. Well, with mixtures, we've created different races, but the original three races were Asian, black, and white. So coming from Noah with his three sons. So, uh, I mean, yeah, it's the point I'm understanding from the book is that there is going to be an extinction of Europeans, but you know, if you really look into the history of what a white person is, we're essentially Persians. When it goes back how many years? It's like if you look at the old paintings of Zoroaster, which is a man who was in the um, who's talked about in the book of, I believe, First and Second Chronicles with Cyrus the Great. So it's just you know it's well, I mean, what I believe Pat Buchanan is getting at is that it's a theme. It's a bunch of things at once that culminate to make America what it used to be. So, all right, let's continue.
Which gave us Rome and all its glory, St. Peter's and the Sistine Chapel, Dante and Michelangelo, Columbus and Galileo, are even more dire. Italy's birth rate has been below replacement levels for 25 years and is down to 1.2 children per woman. At this rate, Italy's
Right.
57 million people will fall to 41 million by 2050, writes population researcher Nicholas Eberstadt of American Enterprise Institute. Barely 2% of the Italian population in 2050 would be under 5 years old, but more than 40% would be 65 or older. 14 the birth rate in that most Catholic and romantic of nations, adds New Republic-esque Register. Brooke, means that Italy will be a theme park in a few generations. 15 a recent survey in the popular, semi-feminist magazine Noidun found that 52% of Italian women between 16 and 24 plan to have no children. 16, career was their principal reason for not wanting any kids. University of Rome demographer Antonio Golini says that the nation is already dependent upon immigrants to bear the load of its deeply indebted pension system, but now Italian culture is at risk. Golini believes Italy will no longer be Italian. It will be the end of society as we know it. 17 Golini was called a demographic terrorist 20 years ago, when he first warned of Italy's impending population crisis. 18 he is called that no longer, though Dr. Golini remains deeply pessimistic about his country. In an increasingly globalized labor market, Italy must compete with France, with the United States, with India. How can we, with such an aged society and so few young people? 19 Cardinal Giacomo Biffi of Bologna.
It goes down even more so than that with God's judgment on the world of him using the coronavirus. So, because a lot of the people that were deeply affected with death rates were Italians, Sicilians. So, other than America, that was like one of the biggest spots in the list of 10 spots affected by the COVID-19 virus, the coronavirus. So, Yeah, I mean, I could see that there was a possibility that Italians could go extinct by 2050, because they are a very old population of people. So I can understand that.
Called on Rome to restrict immigration to Catholics to save the nation's identity, raising eyebrows with his remark that Muslims have different food, festivals, and family morals. 20 But where does His Eminence propose to find these Catholics? Certainly not in Spain, where in the days of the Caudillo General Francisco Franco, big families were sacred and received medals and gifts from the state. The Spanish birth rate is the lowest in all Europe, lower than that of Italy, the Czech Republic, or Romania, all of which have fallen to 1.2 children per woman. In Spain, the birth rate is down to 1.07 children per woman, and the population is projected to fall by 25% in 50 years as the number of Spaniards over 65 soars by 117%. In one generation, we have gone from a society in which families of 8 or even 12 children were not unusual to one in which childless couples are common, or people think long and hard about having a second child, says Madrid sociologist Victor Perez Diaz. 21 By 2050, the median age in Italy will be 54 and in Spain 55. 14 years above the median age of Japan, the oldest nation on Earth today. Prosperity has strangled us, says Dr. Pierpaolo Donati, a leading Catholic intellectual and professor of sociology at the University of Bologna. Comfort is now the only thing anybody believes in. The ethic of sacrifice for a family, one of the basic ideas of human societies, has become a historical notion. It is astonishing. 22 In 1950, Spain had 3 times as many people as Morocco across the Strait of Gibraltar. By 2050, Morocco's population will be 50% larger. If 100 Spanish young people marry today, they can expect to have 58 children, 33 grandchildren, but only 19 great-grandchildren. Russia was the late command post of a Soviet empire that shook the world for 70 years. With a birth rate of 1.35 children per woman, Russia's 147 million people will fall to 114 million by 2050, a greater loss than the 30 million death attributed to Stalin. The number of children in Russia under 15 will have fallen from 26 to 16 million, while today's 18 million seniors will have grown to 28 million. In December 2000, however, more ominous news came in. Russia's
Well, I mean, even with Italy and Russia, it's debatable. It's debatable whether they're even. They're not Europeans. It's debatable that both of those races are even white. So I'm thinking he's just lumping in everything together that's not Asian or black or Indian, is what I'm assuming.
Birth rate had already plummeted to 1.17 children, below Italy's. Its population had fallen to 145 million. One estimate had it headed to 123 million by 2015. If you believe the forecasts made by serious people who have devoted their whole lives to studying this question, warns President Putin, in 15 years' time there will be 22 million fewer Russians. Just think about that figure. It's a seventh of Russia's population. 23 A loss of 22 million Russians in 15 years would be greater than all the Soviet Union's losses in the Hitler-Stalin War. Putin went on to add ominously, if the present tendency continues, there will be a threat to the survival of the nation. Life expectancy for Russian men is now 59, and 2 of every 3 pregnancies in Russia are terminated before birth.
Okay, no, I understand.
Russian women have.
I do understand that, but most people that are even of any race are, a lot of us have bloodlines going back to Mongolia through Genghis Khan. So it's just I'm starting to understand the point of this book, that it's not just population, race, faith. It's like a whole bunch of things into one. So I'm just saying, but there's a few inconsistencies that I'm noticing here. So I mean, ultimately, I'm just going to say this for even, I probably should just say this for the last part, but of this video series I'm going to do. But if God wants a certain race of people, let's just say Europeans or white people, which is of his creation, if he wants him here on earth, God will intervene supernaturally. So you don't have to worry about that. So Let's continue.
Average 2.5 to 4 abortions each, and Russia's death rate is now 70% higher than the birth rate. 24 Even the return of millions of Russians from the former Soviet republics cannot offset the dying. Most ominous for the largest nation on Earth, the population of vast, vacant Siberia is in a steep decline as China's enormous population swells inexorably. When the deputy speaker of the State Duma, the rabid nationalist Vladimir Zhirinovsky, advanced such ideas as polygamy, allowing every Russian male to have 5 wives, plus a 10-year ban on abortion and a prohibition on Russian women traveling abroad, his ideas were ridiculed and his population bills voted down. 25 But the life crisis of Russia cannot be dismissed, and the geostrategic implications for America are ominous. Mr. Kamey projected Russia's population, at present birth rates with zero immigration, out to the century's end, and came up with fewer than 80 million Russians in 2100, roughly the population of the United States when Theodore Roosevelt left office in 1909. 26. Great Britain. 19. What does the future hold for the cousins? Demographers have calculated that by the end of this century, the English people will be a minority in their homeland. The English are not.
I mean, obviously that one's true, but that's just of all of Europe. I mean, France is having that problem now where there's an influx of it's mostly Muslims, dark-skinned Muslims coming over from the Middle East, like in all the parts of the Middle East they are now refugees or agents of soldiers of whatever insurgency are going over there to live in like France and different places of Europe. So yeah, I mean, it's just that is the influx that's going on right now. So
Having enough children to reproduce themselves, writes the syndicated columnist Paul Craig Roberts. 27 This is the first time in history, says the London Observer, that a major indigenous population has voluntarily become a minority, rather than through war, famine or disease. 28 The Observer is mistaken. The honor of being the first nation to voluntarily turn its majority indigenous population to a minority will go to the United States. President Clinton predicted it would happen by 2050, half a century before Great Britain, but the British are clearly heading in the same direction. Ethnic minorities already constitute 40% of London's population, and, as Lee Jasper, the race relations advisor to the Mayor of London, states, the demographics show that white people in London will become a minority by 2010. 29 Among the reasons is the steadily falling birth rate among native-born British. In 2000, there were 17,400 fewer births in England and Wales than in 1999, a drop of almost 3%, and the fertility rate fell to 1.66 births per woman, the lowest since statistics began to be kept in 1924. 30 Japan. Of the 22 nations with the lowest birth rates, only 2 are outside Europe, Armenia and Japan, the first Asian nation to enter the modern era. Not until 1868 did Japan break out of her isolation. But within 30 years this dynamic nation was a rival of the Western powers. Japan had defeated China, colonized Taiwan, and in 1900 sent her soldiers to march beside Europeans and Americans to relieve the diplomatic legations in Peking besieged by the Chinese rebels known as the Boxers. The Russo-Japanese War, 1904-5, was the first in which an Asian people defeated a great Western power. Begun with a surprise attack on the Russian naval squadron at Port Arthur, the war ended in one of the most decisive battles in history, the sinking of the Tsar's Baltic fleet in the Straits of Tsushima in 36 hours by Admiral Togo. In World War I, Japan was an allied power whose contribution to the war effort was to roll up the Kaiser's colonies in China and the Pacific, defend Europe's imperial possessions in Asia, and escort the troops of Australia and New Zealand to Gallipoli. Japan also sent a naval squadron to the Mediterranean. But when President Harding and Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes pressured London to break its 20-year alliance with Japan at the Washington Naval Conference, the Japanese felt betrayed, humiliated, isolated. The die was cast. 20 years later came Pearl Harbor and the total destruction of Japan and an empire constructed over 60 years at an immense cost in blood and treasure. But with American assistance and by copying American methods and ideas, post-war Japan became the most dynamic nation on Earth. By 1990, her economy was the second largest, half the size of the United States economy, though Japan occupied an area smaller than Montana, an extraordinary achievement of an extraordinary people. But something has happened to Japan. She, too, has begun to die. Japan's birth rate is half what it was in 1950. Her population is projected to crest soon at 127 million, but fall to 104 million by 2050, when there will be fewer than half as many Japanese children as there were in 1950, but 8 times as many seniors as in 1950. Her dynamism will be dead, her Asian role diminished, for there will be 15 Chinese for every single Japanese, even the Philippines, which had only a fourth of Japan's population in 1950.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I don't know if this is necessarily something that's like a sad thing or not. It's just there's just a whole lot of people that are among my age bracket and brackets below this. Excuse me. That so it's uh, it's a thing where when it comes to the race of the Japanese, this is also I've seen a video on this when it comes to South Koreans where their birth rate is plummeting right now. It's we're just in a strange era of the history of the world right now in 2020. I mean, going back to 2000 and now, and then it's going to continue to like what Pat Buchanan is saying, 2050, where there's going to be certain races that used to have a lot of people are going to be diminishing and changing in a way that just um, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what Japan would turn into without Japanese people. I'm assuming just like the same thing that's happening here um, with the United States of having more where Europeans are going to be the minority eventually. But I just don't exactly see the point as that being a bad thing. I understand that if it was like a secular mindset through, let's say, communism or whatever, or just this thing that is just completely rampant in the Western church of the prosperity gospel and just not acknowledging wrath and judgment of God, then yeah, I completely agree with that. But just for a populace of certain, like a populace of certain people, I'm just not understanding exactly why that's bad. But so let's continue here.
We'll have 25 million more people by 2050. The reason for Japan's baby bust? More than half of all Japanese women now remain single by 30 years of age, known as parasite singles. They live at home with their parents and pursue careers, and many have abandoned any idea of marrying and having children. 31. Live for myself and enjoy life is their motto, with Japan's elementary schools in 2000 taking in the smallest class in recorded history. Tokyo has raised the child allowance to $2,400 a year per child for 6 years. Some conservatives want to multiply that tenfold. One pioneering Japanese female journalist in her 60s, Mitsuko Shimomura, told the New York Times as Peggy Orenstein that Japan is getting what it deserves for not granting full equality to women. I don't regret the decline in the birth rate. I think it's a good thing. The parasites have unintentionally created an interesting movement. Politicians now have to beg women to have babies. Unless they create a society where women feel comfortable having children and working, Japan will be destroyed in a matter of 50 or 100 years, and children's subsidies aren't going to do it. Only equality is. 32. These women are deciding the fate and future of the Japanese nation. Japan's Asian empire was smashed in 1945, but something happened more recently to sap her vitality and will to live, grow, and expand and conquer in industry, technology, trade, and finance. Vitality and will to live, grow, and expand and conquer in industry, technology, trade, and finance. Observers call it a loss of what famed economist J.M. Keynes described as animal spirits. But perhaps there is another, simpler explanation. Age. Of the 190 nations on Earth, Japan is the oldest, with a median age of 41. For Japan was the first modern nation to legalize abortion, 1948, and her baby boom ended soon afterward. Long before the end of the baby booms in the West, is there a parallel between the dying Christianity in the West and the death of Japan's pre-war and wartime faith? When nations lose their sense of mission, their mandate of heaven, the faith that brought them into this world as unique countries and cultures, is that when they die? Is that when civilizations perish? So it would seem. Let us look again at the population.
Okay, so we only have like we only have a minute left here. Okay, so thank you guys for listening. Let's go ahead and end part 1 here. Stream next Tuesday, either next Tuesday or next Wednesday for part 2. There are 319 pages in this book, so this is going to be about parts 4 through 5. And what I want to do with this video series is I'm going to be, once we get finished after a month doing this, I'm going to lump them all together as like a 4 to 5 hour video, so you can just listen to it all at once if you want to listen to my critiques of this book and just read the whole book as an audio book just by itself, like if you want to do that. So thank you guys for watching today's video, and God bless. And so, okay.